Welcome back, everybody. My name is Tucker, and in today's video, we're once again talking about the NBA All-Star teams. In yesterday's video, I covered my picks for the Eastern Conference, and in today's video, we are doing the Western Conference. But really quickly, before the video gets started, if you enjoy the NBA, then consider subscribing. I upload basically every single day. All right, so let's begin first with the starters. We have 2 guards and 3 front court players, and then we'll get to the bench, in which we have to have 2 guards, 3 front court players, and then 2 wild card spots of any position. Just like in the Eastern Conference, I'm going to go through the starters relatively quickly unless I think there's an interesting debate to be had with one of the players, because I think most of the debates are going to be about the players that are reserves and trying to figure out, who should and should not be put on the team. So we're going to begin with the captain of the team, one of the forwards. It's going to be LeBron. There's really nothing to talk about there. Then we have at both guard spots, Luka Doncic and James Harden as the starters. Again, I don't really feel like there's anything to talk about there. Luka's having an MVP caliber season, as is James Harden, putting up one of the highest scoring averages we have seen in a very, very long time. Then, as I mentioned, LeBron still very up there in terms of top players in the league, and there's just no way you can leave him out of this team. Then the other 2 forward spots, again, for me, are really simple. You have Anthony Davis at 1, and the only argument that you could have for this other player being Kawhi Leonard is the games missed, right? I'm not comfortable doing that because I still think that when it comes down to a postseason series, there's probably not any other player, and if there is, it's only one guy that I would pick over Kawhi Leonard leading my team in a postseason series. And I don't feel comfortable saying that guy shouldn't be an all-star starter and he should be coming off the bench in favor of someone like, for example, Nikola Jokic. I don't necessarily think that that's a good argument to make when I know that this guy is by far one of the 5 best players in the Western Conference, and positionally it fits right in, which makes the Western Conference starters extremely easy for me. Doncic, Harden, LeBron, AD, Kawhi, end of debate. Again, if you want to talk maybe about Kawhi being replaced by Jokic because of the games missed, you can have that conversation. For me, pretty cut and dry, pretty simple. Which brings us now to the bench. We're going to begin with our 2 guards and then our 3 front court players, and then we'll get to our wild card spots. For me, the first guard is going to be Damian Lillard. And there were, I would say, a little bit of a conversation in my head about, should there be another guy that was like a lock as one of the guards? But at the end of the day, he's one of the best guards in the Western Conference. He's someone that carries his team offensively on most nights. And if you wanted to put him, even more involved in the offense, I wouldn't doubt at all that this guy could put up between like 33 and 35 points per game if they really needed him to on like a 2-week stretch. His team success has not been nearly as high as I would have thought it would have been before the season, and I'm sure that they would have hoped that it would be and expected it to be, which certainly you can bring him down a little bit for that, but I'm not comfortable putting him outside of the all-star team because his team just hasn't been all that good to this point. There's plenty of teams and players that we're going to get to here that have a similar record to Portland that I'm not punishing them for their record being bad, so I don't know why I would punish Portland and Lillard for that. And then the other guard here is going to be Donovan Mitchell, and he is a player that is trending up as of late with the time that Mike Conley missed. He was still an all-star caliber player in the beginning of the season, but since Mike Conley went out, he did start to up his game a little bit. Things seem to be freed up. The Jazz in general, as I talked about in a recent video, seem to understand their roles better. Everything seemed to be clicking better, whether it was Joe Ingles or Bogdanovich or Gobert or Mitchell. All those guys seem to understand what they were doing a little bit better without Conley. Now that he's back, they're starting to kind of figure some things out with integrating him as well. But regardless, at any point in the season, you can look and you can say Donovan Mitchell is absolutely an all-star caliber player. The Jazz have one of the best records in the Western Conference. Pretty cut and dry as an all-star lock for me. Now let's get to those 3 front court players that in my opinion are locks, and then we'll get to some of the other guys. First up, Nikola Jokic. Pretty simple. He was the only guy, in my opinion, that could have potentially challenged to be a starter over someone like AD or Kawhi if you want to make the games missed argument. I wasn't a huge fan of the way he started the season, and I still wish that he would improve on certain things in his game, whether it be defensively, getting in better shape, working on, being a little bit more aggressive as a scorer. But since that rough start to the season, he's been fantastic ever since. I got really close to making a rant video about him in the very beginning of the year, and I'm glad I didn't because he's turned some things around. And I'm looking forward to seeing once again what he looks like in the postseason. No question about it, he is an all-star reserve in the Western Conference as one of the front court players coming off the bench. The next guy in the kind of surprising category for me is going to be Brandon Ingram. Like I was surprised how quickly I was like, yeah, Brandon Ingram's one of the best 10 players positionally in the Western Conference when you're just going by this whole guard forward thing. He's been fantastic. I had all but given up on this guy, seeing how he he played with LeBron last year. I understand that certainly for young players at times playing with LeBron is not the easiest thing in the world, but I just felt like there were opportunities for him there, and it just never clicked. And when he was traded to New Orleans, he was dealing with the shoulder issue, and I was like, I don't know. I don't know if it's ever going to happen for him. I mean, I think he should be a solid player, but now, I mean, this guy's going to get a max contract this offseason. Like, do we realize that? Like, the Pelicans are going to have to give him a rookie max extension or whatever the deal is in restricted free agency that's a max for a player coming off a rookie deal. He's been that level of good, and I don't think that there's really much of an argument for him to not be an all-star this season based off the statistical production that he's putting up. And he's another player like Damian Lillard. There's so many teams. There's like 6 teams fighting for the A spot in the Western Conference, and so I'm not really going to punish him for having a below 500 record on his team while they're still waiting on Zion to come back. They've had a ton of injuries, and he's been fantastic the entire season, so he's absolutely an all-star for me. Now we have one more front court spot in terms of the locks, and then you get to your 2 wildcard spots. And for me, it's going to be Rudy Gobert. The Jazz absolutely deserve to have 2 all-star players based off their record this season, and Gobert for me is that player that should be there alongside Donovan Mitchell. He has struggled to make all-star teams in the past because the majority of his impact is felt on the defensive end, but he's up to statistics a bit this year, specifically his rebounding numbers, and has been just outstanding basically for the last 4 years for Utah, but I think it's getting recognized a little bit more this year because their team success is so much more prior to the All-Star break, whereas traditionally they go on their run after the All-Star break, and I think absolutely he should get recognition for that and be an All-Star reserve. Now we get to our 2 wildcard spots, and this is really difficult because if you watch the Eastern Conference video, I had like 3 or 4 players that I was considering for the last 2 spots. For me though, like there's a lot more to consider in terms of out of the player pool to pick from for these last 2 wildcard spots as all-stars. Here are, 6 guys. Yes, there's 6 guys that I have as in the player pool for the last 2 spots. One is Karl-Anthony Towns having an outstanding season as someone that has really upped his game stretching the floor, hasn't had the easiest season in Minnesota, probably wants out eventually. Statistically though, really, really good season. Then you've got Devin Booker. Again, team not as good. They've been better than they've been in years, though, and is one of the better scorers in the Western Conference when he has it going. Russell Westbrook. Statistically, I think he still has to be considered, even though it's not a great fit in Houston. The volume of his production has to be respected. Then you've got 2 Oklahoma City guys, Shai Gilgeous-Alexander and Chris Paul, that are, I wouldn't say carrying a team that has been better than a lot of people thought that they would be, but they've been huge contributors, and their ability to play together has been a really interesting dynamic considering the huge gap in their ages. I think they have to be considered. And then John Morant as well, who is going to win Rookie of the Year and has put a lot of hype around this Memphis team moving forward as potentially one of the teams of the future, and a lot of that has to do with him as well as Jaren Jackson Jr.'s potential, and I think he has to be considered as well. The 2 players I'm going to pick out of that 6-person group to be all-stars in the Western Conference are going to be Karl-Anthony Towns and Devin Booker. I mentioned them first, and I just think that Towns, from a statistical standpoint, from a scoring standpoint, like he's one of the 12 best players in the West when you're going through it position by position like this, in my opinion at least. And so that's really all it came down to, is I looked at the other guys and I was like, Towns is probably the best player out of those 6, and I couldn't leave him off. And I'm sure some of you were sitting there thinking, like, why is Gobert on the All-Star team over Towns? Well, record has to come into play here at some point in terms of how much better the Jazz are than the Timberwolves, and you certainly can't pin all that on Towns. But for me, he is going to be an All-Star reserve. And then the other player is Devin Booker, who, I really respect what it takes to go through as much losing as he has in Phoenix, because I mean, certainly you would expect him and his team to be better given his talent, but you can't put all that on him, and it has to be tough to continually go through that stuff and stick with it. And to get his team to, somewhat respectable status this year, potentially chasing the 8 seed and maybe even a playoff team before we get to the end of the year, I definitely like his chances, not only from team success standpoint compared to the previous years, but also his statistical production. Unfortunately for Westbrook, the efficiency stuff is really bad, and it's not a case that I think a lot of people are going to get behind, because there's other, more popular picks like Booker and like Lillard and Mitchell over guys like Westbrook. And then for SGA and Morant, it's just too soon. They've been really good, and I wish I could put them on here, but there's just too many good guards in the Western Conference. If this is the East, one of them is probably making it, but there's just too many good guards in the Western Conference. And then Paul, again, someone I wish I could have put in but unfortunately there's just the volume of the production isn't there compared to guys like Booker and Lillard and Mitchell, and so I had to put them in over Chris Paul. So to summarize, my Western Conference All-Stars for this season are the starters: Doncic, Harden, LeBron, AD, and Kawhi, and off the bench, Jokic, Ingram, Towns, Lillard, Mitchell, Gobert, and Booker. Others considered being Westbrook, SGA, Morant, and Chris Paul. As always, if you have other opinions, I'd be glad to hear them. That's the whole point of doing these kinds of videos, is understanding, where I'm coming from and then seeing what you guys have to say as well. And if you disagree about a starter, about a player that should have made it that didn't, completely fine. I'm 100% willing to listen to it, and I look forward to seeing what you guys have to say. But that's going to be the end of today's video. Like I said in the beginning, my name is Tucker. If you missed any of my previous videos, then be sure to check out the boxes on screen. Thanks again, and I'll see you all next time.